could. I don't believe we could because before we got to war, we had some real fights before we got to war beyond.
Aaron Pryor was a storm in the ring, explosive, unstoppable, unforgettable. But outside the ropes, his world was falling apart. A betrayal that cut deep, a shadow that followed every fight, and a struggle more brutal than any opponent. This is the untold story of the champion whose fists could conquer anyone except himself. Known as the Hawk, Aaron Pryor fought with a ferocity and relentlessness that made him unforgettable in the ring. He embodied energy, grit, and explosive talent, and before everything fell apart, his career stood as one of the brightest examples of dominance in boxing. Pryor began boxing at a young age and quickly showed signs of being extraordinary. Standing at 5 feet 6 inches with a reach of 69 inches, he was not the tallest fighter in his weight class, but he made up for it with blistering speed, aggression, and unmatched stamina. Fighting out of the light welterweight division in an orthodox stance, Pryor brought an intensity that few opponents could handle. Before turning professional, Pryor built one of the most decorated amateur records of his era. He recorded 204 wins with only 16 losses, a statistic that shows just how dominant he was. Along the way, he collected national titles, winning the National Amateur Athletic Union Lightweight Championship in both 1973 and 1975. His talent also shone on the international stage, where he claimed a silver medal at the 1975 Pan American Games. In one of the defining moments of his amateur career, he defeated Thomas Hearns, who would later become a Hall of Famer and one of boxing's biggest names at the 1976 National Golden Gloves. That victory cemented Pryor as a fighter destined for greatness, and many already believed he was one of the most dangerous prospects in the United States. When he eventually transitioned into professional boxing in 1976, Pryor wasted no time making an impression. He tore through the ranks with a mix of power and non-stop energy, overwhelming opponents with an aggressive style that left them unable to match his pace. By the time his professional career was complete, he had fought in 40 bouts and emerged victorious in 39 of them, scoring 35 knockouts. His single loss came late in his career, but his prime years told the story of a fighter nearly impossible to defeat. The highlight of Pryor's professional journey came in the early 1980s when he captured the World Boxing Association Light Welterweight Championship and defended it in spectacular fashion. But Pryor's achievements did not stop with championship belts and big fights. His name continued to resonate years after his career had ended. In 1996, he was inducted into the International Boxing Hall of Fame, a recognition that placed him among the legends of the sport. In 1999, the Associated Press named him the greatest junior welterweight of the century, an honor that showed how deeply respected he was in that division. 3 years later, The Ring magazine ranked him number 35 on its list of the greatest fighters of the past 80 years. These honors confirmed what fans had already known. Aaron Pryor was one of the most electrifying and dominant champions to ever step into the ring. Pryor's story seemed destined to remain one of glory. His record, his championships, and his relentless fighting style made him a legend. Yet, behind the bright lights of the ring and the accolades he collected, life was preparing to test him in ways he could never have anticipated. The rise was meteoric, but what came next would show a different side of Aaron Pryor that would haunt him until his final days. The success Aaron Pryor built inside the ring should have secured him a future of wealth and stability. His record was nearly flawless, his popularity undeniable, and his skill set unlike anything the sport had seen. Yet, at the height of his rise, decisions made out of desperation and circumstances beyond his control began to unravel the financial foundation he fought so hard to create. One of the earliest turning points came before Pryor had even reached his prime. In his early days as a professional fighter, money was scarce. He had the talent to compete with the best in the world, but lacked the financial backing to build momentum. That vulnerability opened the door to a deal that would haunt him for the rest of his career. The agreement was struck with Buddy LaRosa, a well-known Cincinnati pizza entrepreneur who had become a local celebrity through his restaurant chain. LaRosa saw potential in Pryor But his investment came at a steep cost. The contract promised Pryor $125 per week in guaranteed income, a lifeline at the time when he had little to live on. In exchange, LaRosa secured 50% of all of Pryor's future earnings. For a young fighter struggling to make ends meet, the offer seemed like survival. Pryor needed steady income, and LaRosa's weekly payments meant he could train and focus without worrying about whether he would have food on the table. But as his career accelerated and millions of dollars began flowing in, the true weight of the agreement became clear. The promise of $125 per week had been a short-term solution, but it locked him into a long-term financial trap. When Pryor later earned nearly close to $4 million from his 2 fights with Alexis Arguello, half of those earnings flowed to LaRosa. Even though Pryor was the one putting his body and legacy on the line, his financial independence had been compromised from the very beginning. LaRosa's cut ensured that Pryor never truly had control over the money he was generating, and this lack of freedom created tension and frustration throughout his career. The fallout from the LaRosa deal went far beyond lost money. It also created obstacles when negotiating bigger fights. Boxing in the 1980s was full of megastars, and Pryor was in the perfect position to face them. Sugar Ray Leonard, Roberto Duran, and other household names were all in his orbit. Yet many of those dream fights never materialized because of the contractual disputes tied to his management. Promoters knew that any fight involving Pryor came with layers of legal complications over who would get paid and how much. One of the most significant missed opportunities came with Sugar Ray Leonard. There was interest in staging a high-profile bout that could have brought Pryor not only a massive payday, but also a chance to cement his name among the most celebrated fighters of the decade. At one point, Pryor reportedly turned down an offer of $750,000 for a Leonard fight, demanding more money. But with LaRosa's deal hanging over him, along with conflicting managerial interests, negotiations stalled, and the fight never happened. The same issues reportedly surrounded a potential matchup with Roberto Duran, another fight fans expected to see, but one that dissolved before it could ever be finalized. The management chaos deepened when Pryor aligned himself with Harold Smith, a boxing promoter who promised big things. For a moment, it looked like Smith would deliver. Pryor was scheduled for a unification bout with Saul Mambi, a fight that would have given him the chance to unify the light welterweight division. But the plans were destroyed almost overnight. In 1981, Harold Smith became the center of a national scandal when it was revealed that he had been involved in a $21.3 million embezzlement scheme tied to Wells Fargo. Once the fraud came to light, Smith disappeared, leaving fighters like Pryor stranded. Without a promoter, Pryor lost his chance at a unification fight, and the instability around his career only grew worse. Each of these setbacks took more than money from Aaron Pryor. They cost him opportunities to fight some of the most famous boxers of his time and prevented him from capitalizing on his peak years in the sport. His athletic talent was unmatched, but behind the scenes, his career was tied up in legal battles, broken contracts, and managerial betrayals. The tragedy was that Pryor had built himself into one of the most electrifying fighters of the 1980s, yet he never had full control over the rewards of his labor. The very agreement he signed to survive in his early days ultimately chained him to a cycle of disputes that would drag down his career and strip away much of the fortune he earned. As the years passed, his record and reputation remained intact, but the foundations beneath them were fragile. Every contract, every negotiation, and every dispute chipped away at the stability he should have enjoyed. The spiral had already begun, and while the world celebrated his dominance in the ring, Pryor's personal and financial struggles were tightening around him like a trap he could not escape. The fall was not yet complete, but the damage from these early decisions set the stage for what would come next. Legal battles and broken contracts had derailed his greatest opportunities, but even more damaging were the personal controversies and struggles that soon began to overshadow his boxing legacy. Aaron Pryor's career was filled with unforgettable victories, but one controversy from the height of his success followed him for decades. It centered on a single moment in 1982, during his legendary first fight with Alexis Arguello, a bout remembered as one of the greatest in boxing history. The fight was brutal, with both men delivering punishment across nearly 14 grueling rounds. Yet what happened in Pryor's corner between rounds raised suspicions that have never fully gone away. In the later rounds of the fight, Pryor appeared fatigued, but suddenly surged with energy after taking a drink from a bottle given to him by his trainer, Panama Lewis. Cameras caught Lewis saying, "Give me the bottle I mixed," a line that immediately fueled speculation. The wording suggested that the bottle contained something other than water. Moments later, Pryor came out with renewed energy, launching a relentless barrage of punches that eventually overwhelmed Arguello and ended the fight in a dramatic knockout victory. The mysterious bottle instantly became a topic of controversy. Was it a simple energy mixture, or had something illegal been slipped into it to give Pryor an edge? No official investigation was ever launched, and the exact contents of the bottle remain unknown to this day. Pryor always maintained that he did not knowingly take any banned substances, but the incident left a shadow over what should have been one of his purest triumphs. The controversy grew louder in the years that followed, when Panama Lewis, the man who handed him the bottle, became infamous for another scandal. In 1983, Lewis was banned from boxing for life after being caught tampering with Luis Resto's gloves in a fight against Billy Collins Jr. The gloves had been manipulated to inflict more damage, and the incident ended Collins's career while permanently damaging his eyesight. With Lewis disgraced and permanently exiled from the sport, many critics revisited the Pryor fight and pointed to the controversial bottle as part of a disturbing pattern. Although no proof ever surfaced that Pryor had been given anything illegal during his fight with Arguello, the suspicion lingered. Fans and journalists debated the incident for years, with some insisting that his comeback in the late rounds had been too sudden to be natural. Others argued that Pryor's aggressive style and conditioning had always allowed him to find bursts of energy deep into fights. But regardless of the truth, the perception of unfairness clung to his legacy. Beyond the bottle, Pryor faced another problem that chipped away at his career. His unpredictable behavior outside the ring, combined with the ongoing management issues tied to his contracts, made him a risky opponent in the eyes of other fighters and promoters. Some avoided him, not because of fear of his abilities, but because of the baggage that came with negotiating a fight. The combination of controversy, erratic management, and rumors about possible performance enhancers created an image of a fighter who was as difficult outside the ring as he was dangerous inside it. Instead of being remembered only for his incredible victories and explosive style, Pryor carried with him the stigma of suspicion. The bottle incident became a permanent asterisk to his career. It was a turning point in how the world viewed him. Pryor remained one of the most feared men in the light welterweight division, but respect for his name was complicated by the doubts that followed him. The fights still came, and the wins continued, but the shadows from these controversies left lasting marks. And while they chipped away at his reputation in the ring, a much deeper and more personal battle was waiting for Aaron Pryor outside of it that would prove far more destructive than any opponent he ever faced. At the height of his career, Aaron Pryor looked unstoppable. He was a world champion, a man with millions in earnings, and one of the most feared fighters of his generation. Yet outside the ring, a different and tragic story was taking shape. By the late 1980s, Pryor's life had veered sharply off course. He became addicted to a certain illicit substance that had already ravaged countless lives across America. Pryor once relied on unmatched stamina and relentless discipline. However, his once structured training routines soon gave way to nights spent indulging in his habits, and it wasn't long before his career, once filled with promise, began to collapse. Pryor's descent into addiction was rapid and destructive. He was no longer the champion who had stood tall under the bright lights of Las Vegas. Instead, he was frequently found in questionable places, sometimes overdosing and barely clinging to life. On one occasion, his body finally gave in after days of indulging. He was discovered unconscious in a hallway. His stomach ulcer ruptured, and it was revealed that he hadn't slept in 10 days. Doctors and friends feared he might not survive, and for many, it seemed the man who once ruled the ring had already been lost. The addiction stripped him of stability. Pryor spent time living on the streets, a staggering fall for a man who had once earned millions. His health deteriorated, his finances evaporated, and his relationships fractured. The boxer who had defined himself by endurance and resilience was now battling demons he could not knock down with his fists. During this period, Pryor admitted that he struggled deeply with his mental health and even had inappropriate thoughts. This was a stark reflection of how deeply addiction had consumed him. There was no championship belt, no payday, and no cheering crowd to rescue him. He was alone, broken, and spiraling toward what seemed like an inevitable end. Yet against all odds, Pryor managed to find a way back. In the early 1990s, after years of self-destruction, he began the process of getting clean. The transition was not easy, but once he embraced recovery, he never looked back. For the remaining decades of his life, he maintained his sobriety. He would go on to proudly state that he stayed sober for over 23 years until his death. Sobriety gave him a second chance to rebuild his identity and give meaning to his life beyond boxing. He found faith and purpose, becoming a deacon at New Friendship Baptist Church in Cincinnati. The same energy and determination that once fueled his fighting career were now channeled into his spiritual work and his mission to help others avoid the same mistakes. Pryor also began traveling around the world, sharing his story and speaking against substance abuse. He knew that his name carried weight, and he used it to reach people struggling with the same addictions that nearly destroyed him. In schools, churches, and community centers, he recounted the highs and lows of his journey, offering a message of both caution and hope. He also put his story into writing, publishing his memoir, Flight of the Hawk. In the book, Pryor was candid about the darkest years of his life and the choices that nearly cost him everything. But the central theme was redemption, the idea that no matter how far one falls, there is always a path back to dignity and strength. The memoir stood as a permanent record of both his triumphs and his failures, and it became part of his lasting legacy. By the time the 2000s arrived, Aaron Pryor was no longer the fighter known for his relentless pace and devastating knockouts. He was a survivor who had turned his pain into a mission. Yet, while redemption gave him peace, time could not erase the damage done to his body through years of abuse, both inside the ring and outside of it. His struggles with health would eventually come back into focus as he aged, reminding everyone that even the strongest champions are not immune to mortality. After years of turbulence, redemption, and resilience, Aaron Pryor entered the final chapter of his life with a sense of peace that had once seemed impossible. Though he had conquered his addiction and built a new life rooted in faith and family, his body carried the scars of decades of physical punishment and years of destructive choices. In his later years, Pryor battled heart disease, an illness that slowly weakened him, but never stripped away his determination to remain active and connected to the sport he loved. Even as his health declined, Pryor never fully walked away from boxing. He continued to work with young fighters, passing on the knowledge he had gained from a lifetime in the ring. His presence in the gym was a reminder that greatness could be achieved through discipline and hard work, and many young boxers looked to him not only as a teacher, but as living proof of redemption. He also continued to make public appearances, sharing his story and his wisdom with fans who remembered him not only as a champion, but as a survivor. By 2016, Pryor's health struggles had intensified, and his family knew that time with him was precious. On October 9th, 2016, Aaron Pryor passed away at the age of 60 in his hometown of Cincinnati, the same city where his journey had begun. In his final moments, he was surrounded by his loved ones, his wife, Frankie Pryor, his children, and his grandchildren. The man, who had once felt completely alone in his darkest days of addiction, left the world embraced by the family, who stood by him in the end. The news of his passing spread quickly through the boxing community, and tributes poured in from around the world. Fighters, trainers, and fans remembered him as one of the greatest light welterweights in history, a man whose intensity and relentless style had left an indelible mark on the sport. His widow, Frankie Pryor, released a statement that captured the essence of how he was remembered by those who knew him best. She reminded the world that behind the gloves and titles was a man defined by love and loyalty as much as by his fists. The boxing world mourned the loss deeply. To many, Pryor was more than a champion. He was a symbol of endurance. He had overcome poverty, navigated through betrayal, battled addiction, and emerged with faith and purpose. His death closed the final chapter of a remarkable life, but his story continues to inspire fighters and fans alike. So viewers, over to you. Do you think Aaron Pryor's addiction battle contributed to his decline? Drop your answers in the comment section below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to click on the next video on your screen, like this video, and subscribe to our channel for more updates.